The grand hall of the imperial palace glittered with ethereal light, its crystalline walls refracting starlight into 1,000 dancing colors. Representatives from every corner of the Asterian Empire had gathered, their diverse forms creating a living tapestry of galactic life. Some towered over others with exoskeletons that gleamed like polished armor, while others hovered in gravity pods, their translucent bodies pulsing with internal light. At the center of it all sat Empress Lyra, her obsidian skin absorbing and reflecting starlight in equal measure. The silver circlet that crowned her head contained a shard from each world in her empire, 177 fragments that glittered like trapped constellations. Her four eyes, vertical slits of gold against black, surveyed the assembly with measured calm. "The time has come," announced Grand Vizier Nyx, his voice amplified through the chamber. The ancient Quillion's feathered head bobbed as he spoke, each plume changing color with the inflection of his words. "After 3 centuries of sole rule, our Empress Lyra begins the sovereign selection to choose a consort worthy of sharing the celestial throne." Murmurs rippled through the gathered dignitaries. The selection hadn't been held for over a millennium, and many had assumed Lyra would continue the tradition of ruling alone, as was common for the long-lived Asterians. "Let the candidates approach," Nyx commanded. From different entrances around the hall, figures emerged. Each moved with the confidence of champions, for that was what they were, the finest representatives their worlds could offer. The Dravex warrior Krell stomped forward, his crystalline body catching light with each thunderous step. The Ventari diplomat Shiri glided effortlessly, her tentacled form wreathed in a soft blue glow. The Mechanian strategist Pulse advanced with perfect mechanical precision, synthetic skin barely concealing the complex circuitry beneath. And then, drawing puzzled glances and dismissive sneers, came a figure that seemed painfully ordinary by comparison. He walked with neither the majesty of Krell nor the ethereal grace of Shiri. His body held no technological wonders like Pulse's. He was simply human. Thorn was tall for his species, with shoulders broadened by years of exploration across uncharted worlds. His skin was weathered bronze, marked with a network of faint scars, a living map of survival. Dark hair was pulled back from his face, revealing eyes the color of Earth's sky, a world most in the room had only heard of in historical archives. "A human," scoffed a voice from the assembly. "Has the selection become a comedy?" Empress Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly, the only indication that she had heard. Nyx raised his feathered arms. "Each candidate has been vetted through the preliminary trials. Each has earned their place." Krell's crystalline form vibrated with a sound like breaking glass, laughter among his kind. The human's ship probably got lost and wandered into the trials by accident. A ripple of amusement spread through the hall. Humans were known throughout the galaxy as explorers and diplomats, occasionally traitors, but rarely as warriors or leaders worthy of standing beside the ruler of the largest empire in known space. Thorn's expression remained neutral, though his eyes briefly met the Empress's. She found herself intrigued by what she saw there, not offense or embarrassment, but something closer to patient amusement, as if he had heard such dismissals many times before. Lyra stood and the chamber fell silent immediately. Her voice was surprisingly soft, yet it carried to every corner of the vast hall. "The sovereign selection is not a matter of tradition alone, it is the process by which we ensure the empire continues to evolve." Her gaze swept across the candidates. "Each of you represents qualities valued by the Asterian throne: strength, wisdom, adaptability, innovation." Her eyes lingered briefly on Thorn, "and perhaps perspective." She descended the 7 steps from her throne, each step illuminating as her foot left it. "The first trial begins now, the trial of endurance." With a gesture from Vizier Nyx, the crystalline floor of the hall transformed. Portions rose while others sank, creating an elaborate obstacle course that stretched throughout the chamber. At intervals stood mechanical constructs, training automatons programmed to test combat prowess. "Each candidate will face the course and its guardians," Nyx explained. "You will be judged not merely on speed, but on efficiency, adaptability, and conservation of energy." The dignitaries moved to viewing platforms that rose from the floor, eager to watch the spectacle. Thorn studied the course with careful eyes, noting how the other candidates prepared. Krell rolled his shoulders, crystal fragments clicking as he limbered up. Shiri's tentacles weaved complex patterns in the air, meditation techniques of her species. Pulse stood perfectly still, likely running thousands of combat simulations internally. "Challenger Krell will begin," announced Nyx. The crystal warrior launched himself into the course with devastating power. Where obstacles blocked his path, he simply smashed through them. The training automatons approached and he met them with equal force. It was impressive, even awe-inspiring, but Thorn noticed how the Empress watched with analytical eyes. Krell completed the course in record time, his crystalline body barely showing stress as he bowed to the applause of the crowd. Shiri went next, her approach entirely different. Where Krell had used brute force, she used fluidity. Her tentacled form slipped through narrow passages and around obstacles rather than confronting them. When facing the automatons, she used their own momentum against them, redirecting rather than opposing. Her time was slower than Krell's, but she finished with energy to spare. Pulse's attempt was a marvel of efficiency. Each move precisely calculated, each obstacle addressed with the minimum necessary force. The audience watched in appreciation of such technical perfection, though some found the display oddly bloodless, lacking the passion of Krell or the grace of Shiri. Then it was Thorn's turn. As he approached the starting position, whispers circulated again. "This should be brief," someone commented. "Humans have neither the strength of Dravex nor the fluidity of Ventari," added another. Empress Lyra leaned forward slightly, her interest evident only to those who knew her well. Nyx, at her side, noticed. "You find the human curious, your radiance?" he asked quietly. "I find unpredictability curious, old friend," she replied. "The others perform exactly as expected of their species." When the signal came, Thorn did not immediately charge forward as Krell had done. Instead, he took a moment to survey the first section of the course again. Then he moved, not with overwhelming power or supernatural grace, but with purpose. Where Krell had smashed through barriers and Shiri had flowed around them, Thorn seemed to engage with the course itself. He used momentum from one obstacle to vault over another. When faced with a wall too high to climb directly, he used adjacent structures to create an alternative path. The first automaton approached, its adaptive programming designed to counter the abilities of its opponent. It scanned Thorn, registered his relatively limited physical capabilities compared to previous challengers, and adjusted accordingly. But therein lay its mistake. It had calibrated for an average human. Thorn was far from average. As the automaton lunged, Thorn dodged, not randomly, but toward a portion of the course he had noted earlier. The momentum of the automaton's charge carried it into a narrow passage where its larger frame became wedged. While it struggled to free itself, Thorn continued. With each challenge, he demonstrated the same approach, not overwhelming force, not supernatural ability, but observation, adaptation, and strategic thinking. He used the environment, he used the predictable patterns of the automatons, and occasionally he even used his opponent's assumptions against them. When he finally completed the course, his time was not the fastest. He was breathing hard, sweat glistening on his skin, physical tells of exertion that the other species either didn't experience or could conceal. Yet there was something about his performance that had silenced the mockery from earlier. Empress Lyra's expression remained unreadable, but her upper set of eyes hadn't left Thorn since he'd started the course. "An unexpected approach," Nyx acknowledged, making notes on a translucent tablet. "Is that the diplomatic way of saying I didn't win?" Thorn asked, a slight smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "The selection is not merely about winning individual trials," Nyx replied. "It is about demonstrating qualities worthy of the Empire." After the remaining candidates completed the course, they stood again before the throne. Some showed signs of exertion, others appeared as fresh as when they began. Thorn stood among them, noticeably more weathered than his competitors but with steady eyes. Empress Lyra addressed them. "You have shown your physical capabilities, tomorrow you will demonstrate your minds." She rose from her throne. "The trial continues at first light. Until then you are guests of the Imperial Palace." As the assembly dispersed, Thorn felt eyes upon him. Turning, he found the Empress watching him, her golden gaze inscrutable. For a moment neither looked away. Then she inclined her head slightly, the barest acknowledgement, before sweeping from the hall, her guards falling into formation around her. In the residency wing, assigned to the candidates, Krell approached Thorn. The crystal warrior towered over him, faceted body refracting light in sharp patterns across the walls. "You surprised them, human," Krell's voice rumbled like stones in a polisher. "But tomorrow's trial requires intelligence, not tricks." Thorn met the crystalline gaze calmly. "I'm looking forward to it." Krell made that glass-breaking sound again, laughter. "Your kind always had more courage than sense." He moved away, each step resonating through the floor. Alone in his assigned quarters, Luxurious beyond anything he had experienced in his years of exploration, Thorn stood at the viewport. Below him spread the Imperial City, its spires reaching toward stars that looked different from those above Earth. He had traveled so far, crossed so many boundaries to reach this place. Little did the others know that his presence here was no accident. While they saw only a human curiosity, Thorn carried with him a purpose that went beyond the selection itself. The knowledge he sought, the alliances he hoped to build, they all depended on advancing through these trials. As starlight bathed his face, Thorn smiled to himself. Let them underestimate him. It wouldn't be the first time, and it certainly worked to his advantage. In her private chambers, Empress Lyra reviewed recordings of the day's events, repeatedly returning to Thorn's trial. Nyx entered, bearing reports. "The human interests you," he observed. "It wasn't a question." "He uses different resources than the others," she replied. "They rely on what they are. He relies on what he sees, what he learns." "A necessary adaptation for a species with such physical limitations," Nyx said diplomatically. Lyra's upper eyes remained on the recording while her lower set turned to Nyx. "Or perhaps what we consider limitation is merely difference. You cannot seriously consider a human consort your radiance." Nyx's plumage darkened with concern. "The Council would never accept it." "I did not initiate the selection to please the Council," Lyra reminded him, her voice cooling several degrees. "I did so to find a mind that complements my own, a perspective that sees what I cannot." Nyx bowed, recognizing the subtle warning in her tone. "Of course, Empress, I merely advise caution. There are political considerations." "There always are," Lyra waved a hand, dismissing both the topic and her advisor. "We shall see what tomorrow reveals." After Nyx departed, Lyra returned to the recordings, watching again as Thorn navigated obstacles that should have stopped someone of his species. In her 3 centuries of rule, she had encountered countless individuals from across the galaxy. Few had genuinely surprised her. This human, this Thorn, had done just that. The selection had only just begun. Dawn on Asteria Prime bathed the Imperial Palace in light that shifted between purple and gold, the result of the planet's twin suns rising in sequence. Thorn stood at the viewport of his quarters, watching as the capital city awakened. Massive transport vessels moved between spires, their anti-gravity engines emitting soft halos of energy. Below, species from across the galaxy traversed the elevated walkways, their diverse forms creating a living mosaic. "The trial of intellect will commence in 1 standard hour," announced a melodic voice from an unseen speaker. "All candidates should report to the Hall of Cognition." Thorn, dressed in the formal attire provided, a fitted suit of material that adapted to his body temperature, embroidered with subtle patterns that shifted like starlight. He had chosen to wear his explorer's medallion, a simple metal disc engraved with Earth's solar system. It wasn't ostentatious like the regalia worn by the other candidates, but it grounded him, a reminder of why he had come. As he made his way through the palace corridors, he noticed the subtle glances from the Imperial staff, some curious, others dismissive. Humans were rare in this part of the galaxy, and most Asterians knew them only from historical records or trading encounters. The Hall of Cognition was smaller than the grand reception chamber from the previous day, but no less impressive. The walls consisted of living neural matrices, organic technology that pulsed with thoughts and calculations. At the center stood Empress Lyra, flanked by Vizier Nyx and a group of scholars whose species Thorn didn't recognize. "The mind of a ruler must be sharp, adaptive, and capable of processing complex information," Lyra addressed the assembled candidates. Her voice carried the same quiet authority as before. "Today, you will demonstrate not merely your knowledge, but your ability to synthesize, to innovate, and to understand perspectives beyond your own." Nyx stepped forward. "The trial consists of 3 challenges. First, a test of analytical reasoning. Second, a demonstration of creative problem-solving. Finally, a diplomatic simulation requiring emotional intelligence." Thorn noticed how pulse straightened at the mention of analytical reasoning, clearly the Mechanian's strength. Meanwhile, Shiri's tentacles rippled with what appeared to be anticipation. Ventari were known for their diplomatic prowess. Krell, however, looked less confident than he had during the physical trials. The crystalline being shifted, fragments of his body clinking softly together. The candidates were directed to separate stations around the chamber. Each consisted of a neural interface designed to adapt to their biology. Thorn approached his cautiously. Human neural interfaces were uncommon in his experience and not always compatible. The interface will accommodate your physiology, explained one of the scholars, nodding his hesitation. Though you may experience some discomfort, your species' neural architecture is primitive by comparison. I appreciate the warning, Thorne replied evenly, settling into the station. When the interface activated, it felt like ice water flowing through his thoughts. He gasped involuntarily, earning a condescending look from Krell at the adjacent station. Thorne had experienced neural links before during his explorations, but the sophistication of this Asterian technology was overwhelming. The first challenge materialized in his mind, complex spatial calculations involving the orbital dynamics of a hypothetical star system with 17 planets. The variables shifted constantly, requiring not just calculation but prediction and adaptation. Thorne glimpsed Pulse working through the problem with machine-like efficiency, while Shiri's eyes had closed in complete concentration. Krell appeared to be struggling, his crystalline structure vibrating with frustration. Focusing on his own task, Thorne approached it differently than he might have analyzed actual stellar dynamics. Instead of calculating each individual orbit, he looked for patterns, for the underlying principles governing the system as a whole. It was how humans had first mapped their own solar system, long before they had the computational power to model it precisely. Time passed in a strange flow as their minds worked within the neural matrix. What felt like minutes might have been hours. When the first challenge ended, Thorne emerged from the mental space feeling drained but satisfied. He had completed the analysis, perhaps not with the precision of Pulse, but with insight that might prove valuable. Your approach was unexpected, commented one of the scholarly observers reviewing his work. You sacrificed precision for conceptual understanding. Sometimes seeing the forest is more important than counting every tree, Thorne replied. The second challenge began without delay. This time they were presented with a failing ecosystem, a planet whose delicate balance had been disrupted by an introduced species. The task: find a solution that would restore equilibrium without causing further harm. This was the creative problem-solving phase, and Thorne noticed how the other candidates approached it. Pulse calculated endless simulations, seeking the mathematically optimal intervention. Shiri explored harmonious relationships between species, seeking natural balance. Krell's solution was more direct, introduce predators to control the invasive population. Thorne's approach drew from Earth's long history of ecological disasters and recoveries. Rather than seeking a single perfect solution, he designed an adaptive intervention, one that would evolve as the ecosystem responded, with multiple failsafes and contingencies. It wasn't the cleanest solution, but it acknowledged the unpredictability of complex systems. When they emerged from this challenge, Thorne noticed Empress Lyra observing him with her upper set of eyes, while her lower set remained focused on a data display. There was something in that golden gaze, not approval exactly but interest. The final challenge tests a different kind of intelligence, Nix announced. You will engage in a diplomatic simulation involving species whose values and communication methods differ fundamentally from your own. Success requires understanding, empathy, and adaptability. This time, the neural interface transported them to a virtual environment, a council chamber where representatives of 3 unfamiliar species awaited negotiation. Thorne recognized none of them, which meant they were either extinct or from regions of the galaxy he had never explored. One species communicated through color changes and light patterns. Another used rhythmic vibrations that could be felt rather than heard. The third employed a complex language of sense and pheromones that the interface translated imperfectly. The simulation provided limited background on their cultures and the resources they sought, all of which conflicted in some way. It was a classic diplomatic impasse, with each party unwilling to compromise. Thorne watched as Pulse struggled with this challenge. The Mechanian's analytical approach faltered when faced with emotional and cultural complexities that defied logical analysis. Krell attempted to dominate the negotiation through presence and authority, a strategy that immediately alienated 2 of the 3 parties. Shiri, however, excelled. Her species' natural empathic abilities allowed her to sense emotional currents that others missed, helping her navigate the complex interaction. Thorne's approach was different. Having explored countless worlds and encountered species beyond the Empire's reach, he had developed a method for understanding alien perspectives. Rather than focusing solely on what each party wanted, he sought to understand why they wanted it, the underlying values and needs that drove their demands. By the end of the simulation, he had not achieved a perfect resolution, but he had established a framework for ongoing dialogue, one that acknowledged and respected the fundamental differences between the parties. When the candidates emerged from the final challenge, the Hall of Cognition had grown quiet. The scholars conferred in hushed tones, analyzing the results. Empress Lyra stood apart, her expression unreadable as she reviewed the data. "You have completed the trial of intellect," Nix announced finally. "Each of you has demonstrated different strengths and approaches. The Empress will consider your performances in her evaluation." As the formal proceedings concluded, the candidates were permitted to retire to the palace gardens for refreshment. The artificial environment recreated ecosystems from across the empire, a living museum of botanical wonders. Thorn found himself beside a pool filled with bioluminescent vegetation from the ocean moons of Paraxis. The plants responded to his presence, their glow intensifying as he approached. "They react to electrical fields," came a voice behind him, "even the faint ones generated by a human nervous system." Thorn turned to find Empress Lyra standing there, without her usual entourage of advisors and guards. Up close, her height was more apparent. She stood nearly a head taller than him, her obsidian skin catching the garden lights in ways that made it seem as if galaxies moved beneath its surface. "Your radiance," he said, inclining his head respectfully. "I didn't hear you approach." "Asterians evolved as predators," she replied matter-of-factly. "Silent movement became unnecessary millennia ago, but the trait persists." Thorn smiled. "Old adaptations die hard. Humans still get goosebumps when frightened, a useless reaction from when our ancestors had more hair." Lyra's upper eyes blinked in what might have been amusement. "You performed, interestingly, in the trials today. Not as well as Pulse in analytics or Shiri in diplomacy," he acknowledged. "Yet your approaches were integrative in ways theirs were not." She moved closer to the pool, and the plants reacted more intensely to her presence. "You see connections where others see only individual problems." Thorn watched as patterns of light rippled through the water following her movements. "It's a human trait. We're not the strongest or fastest species, so we survive by understanding systems rather than dominating them." "An unusual quality in a candidate for the selection," Lyra observed. "Most seek to demonstrate superiority, not perspective." Before Thorn could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Vizier Nix, accompanied by several members of the Imperial Council. The oldest of them, an Asterian whose skin had faded to gray with age, regarded Thorn with obvious disapproval. "Empress, the Council requires your attention," he said, barely acknowledging Thorn's presence. "Matters of state cannot wait." "Councillor Vex," Lyra replied, her tone cooling noticeably. "I was not aware that the Sovereign's time was now managed by the Council." The older Asterian bowed stiffly. "Of course not, Your Radiance, but there are concerns about certain aspects of the selection that require immediate discussion." His meaning was clear, even without the pointed glance he directed at Thorn. "Then by all means let us discuss them," Lyra said. She turned to Thorn. "You will excuse us." It wasn't a question, but Thorn bowed respectfully. "Of course, Your Radiance." As the Empress departed with her advisors, Thorn noticed Krell watching from across the garden, his crystalline eyes reflecting light in fractured patterns. The Dravex warrior approached once the Imperial party had gone. "The Empress spoke with you," Krell stated, his voice like gravel over glass. "What did she want?" "To discuss bioluminescent plants," Thorn replied lightly. "They're quite fascinating." Krell's crystalline body shifted, fragments realigning in what might have been irritation. "You mock me, human, not wise." "Not at all," Thorn said evenly. "We genuinely discuss the plants. The Empress appears to have wide-ranging interests." "The Council will never accept you," Krell said, changing tactics. "Even if you somehow advance further in the trials, the Empire has traditions older than your entire civilization." "I'm aware of the Empire's history," Thorn replied. "Are you aware of humanity's?" Krell made a dismissive sound, crystal fragments clinking. "A footnote in galactic records, former colony world, self-governed for barely a millennium." "And yet here I am in the same selection as the mighty Krell of the Dravex," Thorn said with a slight smile. "History is full of surprises." The crystalline warrior leaned closer, his massive form towering over Thorn. "The next trial will determine your fate, human. The trial of spirit is not overcome with clever tricks or unusual thinking." With that, Krell turned and moved away, each step producing small fractures in the garden path that sealed themselves after he passed. Left alone, Thorn returned his attention to the bioluminescent pool. The patterns had changed, becoming more complex, almost like a message being written in light. He wondered if it was random or if there was meaning there, patterns beyond his perception. Much like the selection itself, he reflected. On the surface, it appeared to be a series of tests to find a consort worthy of the Empress. But Thorn suspected there were currents moving beneath, political maneuvers, ancient traditions, and perhaps even Lyra's own hidden purposes. That evening, as Thorn prepared for the next day's trial, a small package was delivered to his quarters. Inside was a data crystal of Asterian design, accompanied by a note written in precise characters. Knowledge is the foundation of understanding. L. When placed in the room's interface, the crystal revealed historical records not available in the public archives. Detailed accounts of previous selections, the political consequences of each, and the complex relationships between the Empire and its neighboring territories. Thorn studied the information late into the night, absorbing the patterns of Asterian politics and culture. The message was clear. Lyra was providing him with context that might prove crucial in the trials ahead. What wasn't clear was why. In her private chambers, Empress Lyra faced the Imperial Council. Their displeasure was evident even through the formal language of court protocol. The human advances beyond expectation, Counselor Vex stated. It creates uncertainty among our allies. The selection follows ancient law, Lyra replied calmly. All candidates are judged by their merits, not their species. Of course, Your Radiance, Nyx intervened diplomatically. But perhaps the Council's concern is that traditional alliances might be disrupted by unorthodox outcomes. Lyra's 4 eyes focused on the assembled counselors. I initiated the selection to strengthen the Empire, not to reaffirm what already exists. If innovation disturbs you, perhaps it is time to examine why. The Council had no immediate response. For centuries, Lyra had ruled with wisdom and strength. Her decisions, though sometimes controversial, had invariably proven correct in the long term. Yet this, the potential elevation of a human to imperial consort, challenged foundations that had stood for millennia. The trial of spirit approaches, Lyra continued into the silence. Let us see what it reveals before passing judgment. As the council departed, Nyx remained behind. The old Quillian's plumage had darkened with concern. You sent him the historical archives, he observed. It wasn't a question. Knowledge is available to all who seek it, Lyra replied. But guidance on where to look is not, Nyx's feathers rippled. You favor him. Lyra moved to the viewport, gazing out at the night sky where distant stars represented worlds under her protection. I favor potential old friend. In 3 centuries of rule, how many minds have truly surprised me? Few, Nyx acknowledged, but the human, his presence in the selection creates complications we cannot ignore. Perhaps complications are exactly what the Empire needs, Lyra said softly. Stagnation is a slow death, Nyx. We have ruled the galaxy for so long that we have forgotten how to change.